Well, social entrepreneurs are traditionally been thought of as people who use entrepreneurial skills to meet social needs. And I guess 10, 15 years ago, that was very much thought of in terms of them just operating as individuals, creating their own social enterprise, and having a mix of the business skills of how do you put together a business plan and make gain revenues and sell a service, along with an awareness of social need and social pressures. The reason the whole movement's shifted a bit towards the language of social innovation is recognizing that often the most important processes of social change, they do involve individual social entrepreneurs, but they also involve networks, they often involve teams, they're much more collaborative processes, they often happen across the boundaries of different sectors involving public officials, people in business, NGOs and so on. And sometimes a purely individualistic story about social entrepreneurs doesn't quite capture the way in which profound change happens on issues like disability or the ecology or equality. And that's why I think the frames are now moving a little bit on from, as I say, the individual hero stories of social entrepreneurship to more stories about how do whole teams, whole organizations learn how to innovate socially and learn how to collaborate effectively to achieve social change. Most countries train a traditional set of leaders to be politicians or judges or business leaders or doctors or lawyers, but they're not usually very good at generating and supporting the leaders who will in fact drive social change. I think that's beginning to shift in some respects. We've got the beginnings of much more systematic support for social entrepreneurs, identifying them, helping them grow skills. We run schools for social entrepreneurs. The British Council's backing various projects around the world too. There's also much more work on generating younger leaders, particularly from marginalised backgrounds, to get the skills to speak, to organise, to collaborate, to negotiate, all the things which you need, particularly in very diverse, fast-changing cities, in many of which there's actually a leadership deficit because the old leaders of the past no longer reflect the populations as they are, aren't sufficiently in touch, aren't sufficiently strategic, aren't sufficiently perhaps motivating for their public. And there's some very interesting developments in Britain now happening around much more systematic cultivation of leaders from an early age, whether they then lead in business or the arts or in politics or in power. We've been running a project called Uprising, which is taking emerging leaders, 18 to 25, and giving them a really strong grounding in how to fill public roles and use public power for the common good. But I think this is a territory which has perhaps in the past scarcely existed as part of the activity of national institutions and agencies, but it's increasingly recognised as critical to helping societies cope with periods of rapid change. And more we're wanting to see countries learn from each other how to do this well. And we've just been working with the British Council in Northern Europe on a thing called the Urban Ideas Bakery, which is really a toolkit of how, at the level of a city, can you mobilise the creative leaders from all sectors, from NGOs, the arts, public authorities, business, to work together on collaborative, creative solutions to the big problems like how to cope with care for the elderly, integration of migrants, unemployment, and so on. So this is a very exciting field. Most of the developed world certainly has some very immediate pressures of economic crisis, of rising unemployment and falling growth and so on, which they're having to respond to with big injections of money and emergency responses. And then they've got these longer term challenges like how to cope with aging or multicultural societies and so on. I think the really interesting question for 2009 and 10 is how do you make your responses to the first immediate pressures of recession also help you solve the longer term challenges of ecology, aging, culture and so on. And that's where the debate has reached in some countries in Europe. How do we use our investments in fiscal stimulus packages to speed up the shift to a green economy? To shift up new ways of, to speed up new ways of integrating diverse communities in successful ways together, to speed up our innovation of new models of housing or finance or care for an ageing population, not spending the money just on failing banks, car companies or building loads of concrete, which is what is happening in many countries of the world. We've got a potential to turn this crisis into a really massive opportunity as well, but that will take a fair amount of courage and, yes, leadership.